The first sign that something had gone terribly wrong did not come from a palace speech. It did not come from a smiling photo call. And it definitely did not come from one of those polished royal briefings that say a lot without saying anything at all. It came from a whisper. A whisper about papers. Private papers. Financial papers. The kind that are never supposed to leave quiet rooms, never supposed to be seen by outsiders, and absolutely never supposed to carry the words, "Final Audit," across the top. That phrase alone was enough to make people stop talking and start listening. Because if there is one thing the royal world understands better than anyone, it is this: when money moves in silence, panic usually follows. So let's talk about what really made this story explode. According to accounts circulating among royal watchers, journalists, and people close to palace circles, a private review had supposedly been running in the background for months. Maybe longer. While the public was focused on King Charles's health, public duties, and the never-ending tension between Britain and California, another story was quietly gathering force behind closed doors. And when word of that review started leaking out, the mood shifted fast. This was no longer just another round of royal gossip. This felt heavier. More dangerous. Because the rumor was not about a cold family dinner, an awkward phone call, or another tabloid headline. The rumor was about money, hidden structures, private deals, and questions nobody wanted asked out loud. People close to the royal beat began repeating the same thing in different ways. Something had been checked. Something had been traced. And whatever had been found had apparently landed like a thunderclap. One palace insider-type account described it as the kind of discovery that makes a room go completely still. Not angry. Not loud. Just still. And honestly, that kind of silence is often worse. Because shouting can be managed. Tears can be spun. Public statements can be polished. But silence? Silence usually means the people in power are trying to understand how bad the damage really is. At the center of all this chatter were three names nobody could avoid: King Charles, Prince Harry, Meghan Markle. And hovering around them, like a shadow waiting for shape, was Prince William. Many are questioning how a family conflict that already seemed beyond repair suddenly started sounding like a financial reckoning. That is the part that caught people off guard. Royal fallouts are nothing new. The monarchy has survived jealousy, affairs, scandals, books, interviews, betrayals, and enough cold stares to freeze entire rooms. But this felt different. This sounded organized, deliberate, documented. The early whispers claimed the inquiry was not emotional. It was not personal in the obvious sense. It was supposedly methodical, quiet, legal. The kind of process where every number is checked twice and every signature is looked at like it might tell a different story than the one offered in public. That detail matters. Because family drama can be denied. Paper trails are harder. What many people don't know is that royal controversies become far more serious the moment they stop being about reputation and start being about structure. Once lawyers, accountants, trustees, advisors, and estate experts enter the picture, the tone changes. The issue is no longer who feels hurt. The issue becomes who knew what, when they knew it, and whether anything was built on understandings that no longer hold. And that is where the tension in this story really begins. Reports from commentators and royal observers suggested that the findings, or at least the rumors of findings, were so troubling that senior figures were forced to look at the Sussex situation through a new lens. Not simply as a family feud, not as a public relations war, but as a possible threat to royal control, royal branding, and royal credibility. That is a very different kind of fear. Because once the crown believes something may undermine the institution itself, the gloves usually come off. Not in public. Never in public. But behind the scenes, that is when moves get made. Some versions of the story claimed there were concerns about charitable money, media arrangements, and the use of royal status in business circles far beyond what had been publicly understood. Other versions were more cautious, saying only that certain financial relationships had triggered alarm and that people close to the king were no longer willing to ignore the bigger picture. No verified public document has confirmed the wildest versions of these rumors. That needs to be said clearly. But the reason the story spread so fast is simple. It matched the emotional shape of a family already known for mistrust. That is what made it believable to so many people. Not proven. Believable. And in the royal world, that difference can still be explosive. There were even whispers that Prince William was among the first to grasp how serious the situation could become if those claims ever hardened into something official. Accounts from journalists and insiders reveal that William has long been seen as more cautious, more guarded, and far less willing to tolerate blurred lines between private roles and public duty. So when rumors began circulating that he had seen material linked to the review and reacted with real shock, that detail spread like fire. Because people could imagine it. William, usually controlled. William, usually unreadable. William, suddenly staring at papers he never expected to see. Whether every detail is true is almost beside the point now. The image stuck. And once an image sticks, a story starts breathing on its own. But there's more to this story. The leak alone was enough to create panic among royal commentators. Yet the real drama did not come from the existence of an audit. It came from what people believed that audit had uncovered. Not one issue. Not one awkward question. But a pattern. A pattern involving hidden arrangements, private opportunities, and the possibility that the monarchy's most sensitive fracture had become tied to money in ways the public had never fully understood. That is when the whispers stopped sounding like gossip and started sounding like a warning. And from that moment on, the question was no longer whether this family was divided. The question was how much damage had already been done before anyone decided to look. To understand why these rumors landed so hard, you have to go back before the leaks, before the whispers, before the words "final audit" started making people nervous. You have to go back to the moment Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stopped being seen as simply rebellious and started being seen as unpredictable. That shift did not happen in one day. It happened slowly. At first, their story had the shape of a fairy tale rewritten for modern times. Harry, the wounded prince with the public smile and private scars. Meghan, the confident outsider who looked like a disruption to old rules and stale expectations. Together, they seemed to promise something rare, a royal future that felt less stiff, less silent, less trapped by tradition. For a while, that image was powerful. People wanted to believe in it. They wanted glamour, honesty, pain, romance, rebellion. They wanted the old institution shaken just enough to feel human again. And Harry and Meghan gave them that feeling, at least in the beginning. But royal insiders remember something else. They remember that the excitement came with strain almost immediately. There were stories about tensions behind the scenes, frustrations over staff, disagreements over protocol, questions about media strategy, and deep unease about who was influencing whom. Some of those reports were denied. Some were softened. Some were buried under bigger headlines. But the pattern was already there. Two worlds were colliding. And neither side trusted the other enough to bridge the gap. Unlike William, who had spent his whole life learning the discipline of staying inside the royal machine, Harry often looked like a man who hated the machine but still expected to move through it on his own terms. That contradiction mattered. It became one of the central emotional engines of everything that came later. Because wanting distance from the institution is one thing. Still benefiting from its power is another. That was always going to be messy. Meghan, meanwhile, became the lightning rod for nearly every fear in the system. To some observers, she represented ambition, reinvention, and media intelligence. To others, she represented disruption wrapped in charm. Depending on who was telling the story, she was either a woman unfairly blamed for everything or someone who understood exactly how influence worked and intended to use every inch of it. That split in perception never healed. It only grew sharper. Then came the exits. The interviews. The public grievances. The tearful claims, the accusations, the books, the documentaries, the carefully timed revelations. Every new chapter deepened the sense that this was no longer just a family disagreement. It had become an international tug-of-war over truth, victimhood, loyalty, and image. And each time Harry and Meghan spoke publicly, supporters saw courage while critics saw strategy. That divide is crucial to this entire story. Because once the Sussexes moved into a world of commercial deals, branded narratives, media partnerships, and global storytelling, a new question began floating around behind the scenes. Where exactly did private life end and royal value begin? That question is uncomfortable for everyone involved. Because the Sussex name carried enormous weight. So did Harry's title. So did Meghan's connection to the institution she had publicly rejected but could never fully detach from in the eyes of the world. Their identity had become part pain, part prestige, part market force. And that combination can make people very nervous. Accounts from journalists and insiders reveal that one of the biggest worries inside palace circles was not a single scandal. It was the feeling that boundaries were dissolving. That the line between personal freedom and institutional leverage was becoming harder and harder to define. At first, those worries may have sounded petty. Territorial, even. But then the money headlines kept coming. Deals. Contracts. Projects. Partnerships. Brand activity. Negotiations. Public messaging tied to private profit. Every move added another layer. Every layer made this story harder to simplify. And every public statement about independence raised a quiet, uncomfortable possibility. If they were fully independent, why did their royal connection remain so central to the public value of everything they touched? That question never really went away. It just waited. The warning signs, according to many royal commentators, were not dramatic at first. They were subtle. A reaction here. A frozen relationship there. Delays. Distrust. Conversations that never recovered. Palace figures growing more formal. Communication becoming more legal. Family ties becoming administrative. That is always a bad sign. When a family starts speaking like a firm, something is already broken. And then there was Harry himself. That is where the tragedy in this story often lives. Because even people critical of his choices still describe a man who seemed to be moving through grief, rage, loyalty, resentment, and confusion all at once. Some saw him as manipulated. Some saw him as fully responsible. Some saw both. But very few saw peace. He did not look settled. He looked committed, yes. But settled? No. That emotional instability is one reason this latest wave of rumors feels so potent. If a private financial review really did trigger alarm inside the monarchy, then Harry would not just be facing another public scandal. He would be standing inside the collapse of the one thing he seemed to keep choosing over and over again. The belief that he and Meghan could build a separate world without the ghosts of the old one following them. And ghosts, in royal life, always follow. Some royal watchers point to earlier moments as clues. Tensions over branding. Disagreements over patronages. Friction over business plans. Questions around public narratives and private negotiations. Each incident, on its own, could be dismissed as noise. But laid side by side, they began to form a picture. Not proof. A picture. One in which trust had been draining away for years. One in which people around the king may have already been asking whether the Sussex operation had grown too opaque, too independent in language but too dependent in symbolism. And too risky to leave unexamined. Then came the rumor that changed the tone completely. That the review, whatever its real scope, had not merely raised eyebrows. It had raised alarms. And once alarm enters a royal household, sentiment leaves the room. That is when history shows the institution chooses itself. Even over blood. Maybe especially over blood. So by the time the latest whispers surfaced, the ground had already been prepared. The backstory was not one single betrayal. It was years of layered mistrust, unresolved resentment, bruised ego, public warfare, and the strange business of turning a royal rupture into a global enterprise. That is why the alleged findings, whether exaggerated or not, hit with such force. Because the family had already run out of emotional credit. All it took then was one suggestion, one leak, one document, one frightening phrase, for everyone to believe the worst might finally be true. And then came the part nobody in the palace could afford to mishandle. Action. On this particular occasion, the story did not explode with cameras outside gates or reporters chasing cars down a London street. It moved in a quieter way. The kind of quiet that feels worse because it suggests decisions are already being made somewhere you cannot see. By the time the latest accounts began circulating, the rumor was no longer just that a review had happened. The rumor was that senior royal advisors had started looking at options. Legal options. Protective options. Containment options. That word, containment, kept surfacing in commentary around the story. And it tells you everything about the mood. Containment is not a family word. It is an institutional word. It means whatever this was, some people believed it could spread. Whispers claimed that concerns centered around a web of financial structures, partnership trails, and arrangements that may have created uncomfortable questions about charitable intent, disclosure, and the commercial use of royal association. The most dramatic versions went much further, suggesting hidden vehicles, offshore links, and quiet attempts to monetize influence beyond anything publicly acknowledged. Again, none of the most explosive allegations have been publicly proven, but the suspense came from the reaction those rumors described. Because according to several royal commentary accounts, the response inside senior circles was immediate. No more assumptions, no more trust-based flexibility, no more room for blurred lines. If there were assets, interests, agreements, or funds tied in any way to royal standing, people wanted clarity. Fast. And when institutions want clarity, they do not usually ask twice. Accounts from insiders and journalists reveal that the talk around King Charles changed sharply during this phase. Publicly, he remained what he often appears to be, measured, restrained, almost distant. But privately, according to the stories now circulating, there was a harder edge developing behind the scenes. That detail matters because Charles is often underestimated in stories like this. People see softness where there may actually be patience. They see hesitation where there may actually be calculation. And if even half the rumors are true, then what happened next was not emotional revenge. It was control. Cold control. The kind exercised through law, access, procedure, and recognition. That is what gave this chapter its force. Not shouting. Not outrage. Procedure. Some of the most talked about accounts suggested moves were made to identify and freeze what the Crown's advisors viewed as areas of concern, or at the very least to challenge, isolate, or cut off anything seen as improperly shielded by royal association. Whether that happened formally, partially, or only in theory is still a matter of speculation. But in storytelling terms, this was the turning point. Because for Harry and Meghan, the fear would not have been just about money. It would have been about exposure. If a system starts pulling at threads, it rarely stops at the first knot. And in Montecito, according to the more dramatic tellings, the atmosphere shifted quickly. Calls were made. Meetings tightened. Projects slowed. Advisors began recalculating. The easy confidence that had once surrounded the Sussex brand supposedly gave way to something more brittle, uncertainty. That is the part audiences lean into. Not because people enjoy collapse, but because there is something irresistible about watching a story built on image suddenly collide with paperwork. Many are questioning how much of the reported panic was real and how much was amplified by tabloids hungry for the next royal war. That is a fair question. The British royal media ecosystem has never been famous for restraint. Stories grow teeth quickly there. Still, even exaggerated reports can reveal a deeper truth about perception. And perception, in a royal scandal, can be almost as damaging as fact. One of the most repeated details in this wave of commentary was the claim that Prince William had taken an unusually firm line. No sentiment. No soft landing. No quiet rescue. Just a cold expectation that every question be answered and every account be clarified before any road back could even be imagined. If true, that would be enormous. Because it would mean the split between the brothers had moved beyond pain and into enforcement. That is a different kind of heartbreak. Not the heartbreak of angry words. The heartbreak of someone deciding they can no longer afford to trust you. People close to the royal story have long said William views the monarchy as a structure that survives only through discipline. Harry, by contrast, has often seemed to view it as something that failed him personally and therefore lost its moral claim on him. Those two positions were always going to collide. But if financial fear entered that collision, then the emotional battle became something colder and more final. And then came the darkest whisper of all. That this was not merely about protecting the future. It was about closing the bank. Not literally, maybe. But symbolically, absolutely. The suggestion was that whatever channels of prestige, tolerance, deference, and soft power had continued to benefit the Sussex operation were now under threat. That the institution had decided independence must finally mean independence, with all the costs that word had been avoiding. That idea electrified commentators. Because it carried brutal emotional weight. No shouting match. No dramatic exile scene. Just a door quietly shutting. And Harry, in that version of events, becomes the most tragic figure in the room. A prince raised inside unimaginable privilege, then wounded by it, then desperate to escape it. Then still tied to it so deeply that every attempt to build a new life keeps circling back to the old name, the old wounds, the old money, the old power. It is not hard to see why audiences stay with this story. It has everything. Family, status, money, love, resentment, identity. And the terrible possibility that the thing you ran from is still the thing holding up the ground beneath your feet. By now, the public side of the story was moving at full speed. Comment sections were on fire. Royal channels were dissecting every gesture, every silence, every scheduling decision, every missing statement. Some insisted this was the king's necessary line in the sand. Others believed it was a palace-generated humiliation campaign designed to crush Harry and Meghan once and for all. That split tells its own story. Because even at the height of the crisis, nobody was just reacting to facts. They were reacting to loyalties. And loyalties make people read the same event in completely opposite ways. But one thing was clear in almost every version of this saga: the full truth, whatever it was, had not yet emerged in public. People had fragments, leaks, rumors, claims, counterclaims, no complete picture. And that made the suspense even worse. Because once a scandal reaches that stage, every silence becomes suspicious. Every delay feels strategic. Every denial sounds incomplete. The family at the center of the monarchy had once again become a house of closed doors and unfinished sentences. Only this time, the unfinished sentences seemed to be written in numbers. And numbers have a way of surviving emotion. That was the chilling part. The argument was no longer just about who hurt whom. It was about what could be traced. So what was really happening beneath all the whispers? The honest answer is this: the public still does not have a fully verified map of the story being told in the most sensational corners of royal commentary. There are claims. There are denials. There are patterns people think they see. And there is a mountain of suspicion built on years of mistrust. That is the complete picture, at least for now. But sometimes the power of a royal scandal lies not only in what can be proved, but in what the institution believes it must prepare for. And if the reports are even partially grounded in real concern, then the deeper truth may be less cinematic and more unsettling. This family no longer operates on faith. It operates on defense. That might be the saddest revelation of all. Accounts from witnesses, commentators, and longtime royal observers reveal a picture of total emotional collapse between the key players. Not collapse in the theatrical sense. Not people storming down corridors. But a colder, more believable kind. The kind where relationships stop functioning as relationships and become files, positions, risks, and consequences. King Charles, in this story, is not simply a father. He is a monarch managing threat. Prince William is not simply a brother. He is an heir protecting the structure he expects to inherit. Prince Harry is not simply a wounded son. He is also a man who tied his freedom to a public battle that may have become more expensive than anyone imagined. And Meghan Markle, depending on who is watching, remains either the woman blamed for everything or the sharpest strategist in the entire drama. That unresolved tension is why the story keeps living. Because no one agrees on who the villain is. And when nobody agrees, the audience never leaves. Public reaction, as expected, has split into camps so fiercely that almost every new headline is treated like proof of something bigger. Supporters of Harry and Meghan see a familiar pattern: the monarchy using silence, hierarchy, and old networks to isolate the couple while protecting its own image. Critics see something very different: a long overdue reckoning with blurred ethics, aggressive branding, and years of trading on royal association while attacking the institution that created it. Both sides speak with certainty. That certainty is part of the spectacle. These stories provide insight into something larger than one family feud. They show how modern scandal works when royalty meets celebrity, when private grievance becomes content, and when personal pain can be packaged, sold, defended, and attacked in real time across continents. This is no longer the age of one official version. It is the age of competing realities. And the Sussex saga may be one of the clearest examples of that. What makes this chapter especially gripping is the symbolic question at its core: what happens when a royal brand tries to become fully independent? Yet the very value of that independence remains tied to the institution it is trying to escape. That contradiction sits underneath everything. It is the pulse under the floorboards. If the palace really did move to isolate financial influence, challenge hidden leverage, or shut down any remaining assumptions of protected status, then the move was not only practical. It was symbolic. It was the monarchy saying that emotional drama may continue forever, but structural access will not. That is a brutal message. And if Harry heard it clearly, it may have hit harder than any tabloid attack ever could. Because tabloids embarrass you. Institutions erase you. Or at least try to. The aftermath of all this remains uncertain, and that uncertainty is exactly why the story still holds attention. If no hard public evidence appears, then this entire chapter may settle into the long archive of royal rumor, half believed, half denied, endlessly repeated. But if more concrete details ever surface, then the consequences could be severe, not just for reputations, but for legal standing, business relationships, and the final shape of Harry's relationship with his family. That is why people keep watching. Not for closure. For impact. Because closure feels almost impossible now. Too much has been said. Too much has been sold. Too much trust has already been burned. And maybe that is the real ending here. Not a courtroom. Not a triumphant comeback. Not even a final public statement. Just distance. Permanent, expensive, icy distance. The kind that settles in when a family has spent too many years turning pain into position and position into leverage. At some point, love stops sounding simple. Duty stops sounding noble. Freedom stops sounding free. And every choice starts carrying a bill that comes due later. That is the shadow hanging over this entire story. Whether the rumored audit was as explosive as people claim, whether the alleged findings were as devastating as whispers suggest, whether any dramatic seizure truly happened in the way the wildest tellings describe, all of that remains clouded. But the emotional truth of the moment feels unmistakable. This family no longer expects misunderstanding. It expects conflict. That changes everything. In the end, Maybe the most haunting question is not what Meghan will do next, or whether Harry will ever find a way back, or how far William is willing to go to protect the crown. Maybe the real question is simpler. What happens to a family when every private wound becomes public currency? Because once that starts, it becomes almost impossible to tell where the heartbreak ends and the strategy begins. And that is why this story refuses to die. Not because it is loud. Because it is unfinished. Because somewhere between Montecito and the palace gates, between loyalty and ambition, between inheritance and escape, the House of Windsor's most painful modern fracture became something bigger than a feud. It became a test. A test of power. A test of image. A test of what remains when trust is gone. And if the rumors are even close to the truth, then one thing is certain. Whatever broke between King Charles, Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and Prince William was never only about family. It was also about value. Who had it? Who used it? And who finally decided to cut the cord? That is the part people will keep talking about, long after the whispers fade.